Ready?
Ready.
Good evening. I'm Carol Frank. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Great Neck Historical Society's program for tonight, A Hidden Treasure in Plain Sight, the telephone building. We met our speaker tonight, Andrew Cronson, through the magic of what else, Zoom, when he provided expert information to the Village of Thomaston's Landmark Commission in regard to Tower Ford, which they were considering for landmarking. He spoke clearly and eloquently about the history of the building and also provided clarity about misperceptions held about landmarking itself. Mr. Cronson grew up next door to us in Manhasset, and he has been fascinated with history and architecture since he was a boy. His early passion has led him to becoming an architectural historian with a deep knowledge of Long Island's residential architecture. He received his undergraduate degree from New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. He currently serves as vice president of the Save Chelsea organization, where he is responsible for the advancement of their special projects and digital initiatives. He has also led a multi-year campaign to restore a monumental mural by noted artist Julian Binford. His preservation work has been featured in local and national publications, including the New York Times, Newsday, Untapped Cities, Vanishing New York, The Villager, it goes on and on. He is also a member of the Wings Club, Archivist Roundtable of Metropolitan New York, and the New York Academy of Sciences. Mr. Cronson will be introducing us to more hidden treasures in Great Neck in the coming months. And tonight we will meet Ralph Walker, who is for his extraordinary that reflect the Art Deco era. When I was reading a little something about him, I took note of the fact that Frank Lloyd Wright, who was rather critical of other architects, actually had a great deal of respect and admiration for him. So, as always, after the presentation, we will open the meeting up for questions and answers and comments. And we always look forward to that lively portion of the evening as well. So I am very, very pleased to introduce you and welcome Andrew Cronson. Turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. So I have a series of slides to sort of describe the life, the work, and the connections of Ralph Walker to Great Neck. And then we will close with some questions. And I'll try and answer anything on Great Neck history to the best of my ability. And I hope that you think of sort of thoughtful and interesting things you might want to know, and I'll be glad to answer. So I have the slideshow here, which hopefully should be presented. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight to talk about Ralph Walker, one of America's most significant yet forgotten architects. This is the first presentation in what I hope will be a multi-part series about the famed historic sites in Great Neck and the preeminent architects who designed them. Although too easily unnoticed, Great Neck is so lucky to have had some of the most significant practitioners of architecture, decorative, and landscape arts in America's history. In the span of just a few hundred feet, you can find designs by Frank Lloyd Wright, Thomas Lamb, Emery Roth, and Alfred Hopkins, which is kind of really incredible. What a privilege it is to be surrounded by such remarkable design and to be able to interact with these works on a daily basis. To begin to understand Ralph Walker, we have to look back to the early 1910s in New York City. As skyscrapers began to be built in Manhattan, there was the fear that there would be these sorts of tall monstrosities that would cast the city in a perpetual shadow. In response, the 1916 Building Zone Resolution sought to give greater openness to streets and improve light, air, and noise through a requirement that buildings be set back after a certain point, like you would think of a wedding cake or a ziggurat form. As the law in New York City did not provide a requirement for how that form should take shape, architects had ample leeway for interpretation. This was actually a novel idea at the time to have a zoning law, and theirs was the first of its kind in the country. In responding to this new challenge, architects thought of new ways to build within that requirement. A famed renderer of the period, artists who would draft and sort of make what would you think of now as 3D renderings, but by hand. A gentleman named Hugh Ferris drafted a series of bold renderings in 1922 that illustrated some of the options that architects could have, which became sort of a guide for how they could respond to this zoning resolution. He developed a unique style of his own, employing chiaroscuro, a treatment of light and shadow, with the light falling unevenly or from a particular direction to illustrate this dramatic new approach. Widely exhibited and published, it gave inspiration for a new future. You'll see here two examples of his renderings for the zoning resolution. One such architect who rose to this challenge was a man named Ralph Walker. A graduate of MIT, Walker worked in the offices of Bertram Goodhue and York and Sawyer before joining the firm of McKinsey, Voorhees, and Gmelin, which was a regarded commercial architect of New York. After the death of partner Andrew Mackenzie, midway into Walker's first project, the firm became Voorhees, Gmelin, and Walker. Walker worked almost exclusively for corporate clients, and especially for the New York Telephone Company, becoming a specialist in the design of the company's buildings. While he was part of a larger firm, he was the one who was largely responsible for the design of their buildings during the period which he was involved with the firm. Walker responded to the moment and to the 1916 zoning law with an evocative form of his own, which was inspired by Czech Cubism and the work of German and Dutch expressionist architects. Caught in between the old guard of traditional classicist architecture and the modern Bauhaus movement coming out of Europe, Walker made masonry modern. He called his style humanism in combining machine-like precision with beauty and ornament. He sought to continue the tradition of American architecture created by H.H. Richardson, one of the great 19th century American architects, to contrast the strength of heft with delicate detailing of ornament. As a member of New York's burgeoning architectural elite, Walker was surrounded by the greats like Raymond Hood, Eli Jacques Kahn, Eliel Saarinen, and Joseph Urban. He and his contemporaries sought to find a new American style that was appropriate to the machine era. Walker's typical style involved complex massing with a vertical emphasis, aesthetic integration of the exterior, interior spaces, and faceted forms echoing the edges of cliffs. The massing of folding and dramatic planes stood out from other office buildings. His skillful manipulation of sculptural forms and ornament flowed from his desire to infuse spiritual qualities into his buildings. Instead of rivals of overseas architecture, he made a brand new amalgamation that had never been seen before, with massing that reflected the aesthetics of the new setback form. This sort of sculptural, functional sculpture was intended to convey strength, power, and success of each respective company. Walker aimed to design all the elements from the interiors to the fixtures. He allied with the talented artisans and artists to execute their work. This 1929 cocktail service is emblematic of his ethos. For Walker, architecture was like music, and that you can create harmony, you can also create dissonance to break it up. He felt that design should be as entertaining as a jazz concert and dramatic as live theater. One of the first buildings he designed was the Barclay Vesey building, which was a headquarters for the New York Telephone Company. He had the task of designing both for comfort of employees and to house equipment, as it was intended for both machines and people. Walker's asymmetrical solution was revolutionary at the time, and it established his reputation. He planned to provide visual heft from brick, but enlivened it with ornament for a whimsical touch. The setbacks evoke the timelessness of Egyptian and Assyrian architecture. The buff color brick was enriched with human-scaled ornament of grapevines and elephants to contrast what was otherwise quite Goliath construction. This hefty craftsmanship actually came in handy on 9/11 when the World Trade Center collapsed. Luckily, the building's thick masonry exterior shielded it from much of the falling debris and absorbed the energy from the collapsed towers, preventing interior fires that were common in most other buildings that day. As the lobby was the first impression of a company, no detail was left untouched. The ceiling is adorned with 12 hand-painted murals with gold leaf accents depicting the history of communication, including smoke signals, carrier pigeons, and the early telephone. With the construction of these telephone buildings, Walker cleverly realized that he could use architecture as a marketing tool. The program of the lobby clearly symbolizes the triumph of modern communication with the use of grapes and grapevines as a representation of communication. Large lights in the middle were made by the acclaimed E.F. Caldwell Foundry. Mac Janney and Tyler executed the allegorical murals, while Samuel Yellen fabricated the intricate ironwork around the elevators. His second work was the Western Union Building, which was designed in 1928 at 60 Hudson Street in Manhattan as the headquarters of the Western Union Telegraph Company. It was the largest telegraph building in the world, with 70 million square feet of wire, a 6,000-seat cafeteria, full auditorium, gymnasium, and a dedicated power plant. 19 different shades of brick were used in order to visually go from dark to light as the eye rises upwards. Interestingly, brick was the only ornamental material used in this case. The vaulted ceiling of the lobby was constructed with Guastavino tiling that was both fireproof and allowed for these dramatic installations. And those who know Guastavino will know him from the work in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine and Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. They were known for these sorts of sobering, dramatic ceilings that can be constructed with these very strong and fireproof tiles. And Walker took advantage of that to make this really dramatic lobby, which is very reminiscent of a cave in some way. Built in 1928 atop an earlier structure from 1923, 204 2nd Avenue in Manhattan was a telephone exchange for switches. The building primarily held machines and sometimes switchboard operators. Generally, telephone exchanges were for function over aesthetics, but this was one of the many exceptions. Walker created an architectural standard, but never applied the standard in a formulaic way for his buildings. The firm designed hundreds of these exchanges throughout the tri-state area around the country. And I'll point out in the process of researching for this, I was absolutely stunned to see the number of telephone exchanges on Long Island and throughout New York. They're all over the place, but we actually barely recognize them when they're there. But there's one in basically every village or so. And they're just there working quietly in the background. Built in 1930, 32 6th Avenue was built atop another earlier structure by the Voorhees firm to serve as the American Telephone and Telegraph Company's central office. It contained 3 cafeterias and a complete medical department. The remarkable lobby was decorated by Gustav Johnson with a mural by Hildreth Mier, who was an acclaimed mosaicist. Ravenna Mosaics executed designs for the lobby of a map celebrating international communication and a ceiling with figures representing the different continents linked by wires. With these mosaics, Walker hoped to use ornamentation to convey a sense of wonderment and reassurance to visitors of the value of telephones, which were not as ubiquitous as they are today. Designed in 1928, One Wall Street was built for Irving Trust, the predecessor of the Bank of New York, at the height of the economic bubble in the late 20s. They wanted something bold, where money is no object, to illustrate their value to wealthy clients. In this case, many of the forms of brick that Walker had used before were moved to carved limestone, and the exterior is almost a smooth skin of limestone. The bank occupied the first 10 floors as well as the top 4 floors, which were used as executive dining rooms. There are also 3 floors of underground vaults. In moving from one building to the other, the bank's assets were moved in the middle of the night with the aid of 200 men armed with machine guns to get them to this building. The grand interior spoke to both the optimism and wealth of the 1920s. In order to achieve a visual richness, Walker used materials like oyster shells, which was akin to pebble dash, to give a bold textural effect. Hildreth Mier was called back to design an abstract pattern for the reception room, which was the first impression clients had of the bank. It was especially unique as a mosaic without using any allegorical figures or religious imagery. Nothing topped the reception room in terms of spectacle. The pattern mosaic that begins in a deep red at the base and rises up in a faceted manner to the ceiling with webs of gold. It was beautiful, but critics at the time found it very excessive amidst the joblessness of the Great Depression. Built in 1929, the Centennial Temple of the Salvation Army was part of a larger complex that Walker designed for them. Many of the concepts he used for skyscrapers were adapted for this design. Walker loved theater and music, which was especially evident in the curtain-like entry for the theater, which was actually notably quite sparse on the inside for decoration. The design hoped to beckon the public inside to attend religious services or receive aid from the Salvation Army. Moving back to Long Island, the Hempstead Exchange was built in 1930 as another large telephone exchange, as the Long Island office for the telephone company. Given the varying zoning requirements in Hempstead versus New York City, there's less of a setback at the top, as opposed to other works of Walker's. While Glen Cove also had a standalone switch, it is not as expressive as Great Neck or Hempstead's. One of the rare buildings that was able to meet Walker's sumptuous detailing was the RCA building on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan. It was built around the same time Walker practiced, and the architects Cross and Cross were certainly, I think, inspired by Walker's ideas of advertising through design. It tried to convey the invisible elements of radio waves or electricity in the ornamentation, which was really no easy feat for them to dream up. It became a truly splendid building and a beloved New York City landmark today. As the Great Depression rode on, Walker's firm might have shuttered permanently, if not for the 1939 World's Fair, which was intended to be the greatest showcase on earth. The theme was the world of tomorrow, and the planners tried to transform the present into the future. People's reality was totally different than what they were used to, and that really stemmed from the architecture that they had. Walker designed temporary pavilions for 7 different companies. After the World's Fair, Walker became an international icon for a brief period, but had to step out of his leading design role as his work fell out of fashion. The firm had over 200 employees by 1929, but shrunk to just 6 by 1930s. The firm's name changed from Voorhees, Walker, Foley, and Smith to reflect the partner changes, but Walker was only a consultant at most by that point. It was during this period that he designed the 3,000-unit Fresh Meadows complex in Queens and the Grace Rogers Auditorium at the Met Museum in Manhattan. The new iteration of the firm continued to take on other telephone exchanges, such as the one built in Manhasset, but is only the slightest nod to Walker's earlier work. By the 1950s, the international style swept through America and left Walker in the dust. Clients wanted Mies van der Rohe and not Walker, and this change nearly shuttered their firm. Known as an iconoclastic Renaissance man, Walker was revered with the architectural elite. He was known for his dry wit, once remarking that he had never seen such ugly furniture as what had come out of Europe, to the point where he wondered if people's rear ends were a different shape in Europe than they were in America. Ouch. He was also known to fly from New York to Chicago just for the purpose of having lunch. Quite the life he had. At the 1931 Beaux-Arts Ball, each architect dressed as their most iconic design, and Walker was dressed as the Irving Trust Building. Must have been a lot of fun, certainly, to be at that party. And they certainly had many remarkable parties during the height of this period. Frank Lloyd Wright famously called Walker the only other honest architect in America for his truth to materials. That glory, unfortunately, only lasted a brief moment. In 1973, Walker was diagnosed with brain cancer, and after being isolated from the profession and sickly, Walker committed suicide by reportedly melting down his AI metal to make a bullet. Walker's firm continued on without him under a new name of Haynes, Lundberg, and Whaler, which executed new works for many of their earlier clients. And they also handled some restorations as the preservation movement grew in America. What was once marvelous brickwork turned to the postmodern brutalist style for telephone exchanges. At first, their later White Plains exchange, which is seen here, would seem to be disconnected from Walker's work, but there is a particular nod to his geometric forms in brickwork. The precast facade with hyper-articulated louvers flow with the verticality of the corrugated concrete blocks. The building was described by the Times at the time as overbearing while also being aggressive. Checking back in with AT&T, one of their earlier clients, years later, 33 Thomas Street was designed by John Carl Warnke and Associates as one of their last telephone exchanges. This design envisioned roughly the equivalent of 50 stories of windowless granite, which was designed this time entirely for machines and not people. As a result of the changing world, the plan was intended to be hardy enough to withstand nuclear fallout and terrorism. As we think about a new world where safety has to dictate design, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, one of the major modern firms now, designed a new emergency call center in 2001, which echoes back to the principles Walker had established in his work. Much like his designs for Western Union, it is intended to operate critical services in a natural disaster or attack. It is an impregnable fortress with blast doors. But sadly, this is the future of our design, with the urgent need to be insular for protection instead of engaging. Before he died, Walker was named the Architect of the Century by the American Institute of Architects in 1957. It was the only award given of its kind so far in history. Peers remarked astonishment that one person could accomplish so much in a lifetime. He designed more iconic buildings in just a few years than many architects ever do in their entire careers. Moving to Great Neck, as one of the treasures of Great Neck, the telephone building quietly exudes the beauty of Ralph Walker's design ethos. As it was mainly intended for a few operators, there was little public activity inside compared to a traditional office building. Mostly machines are operating. Without a recognized address or even officially records filed with Nassau County, it is quite literally a hidden gem in plain sight. 20 Shorewood Drive, as it was known at the time of being built, held positions for 30 switchboard operators with a power plant on site for redundancy. It was reinforced to allow 6 stories to be built if needed in the future, but was intended to harmonize with the high-class surroundings of Great Neck. As one dissects this building, you will begin to see the masterful design that was created. With the absence of carved stone ornamentation, the brick itself gives interest to the streetscape and imparts a sense of fortitude that the structure has strong bones. It is imposing, but still appealing, which is a really delicate balance to strike. A carefully planned program of banding and almost an ombre effect was made with the bricks. One of the other remarkable things is that the ornamentation is visible on 3 sides, which is pretty uncommon for commercial buildings, which would typically only have a front face that was ornamented and just really plain sides for the rest. At the top is somewhat of a mansardian roof, which has a wonderful contrast with the verdigris blue in comparison to the red brick exterior. At the very top, windows exemplify what could be almost a jazzy lookout perch. Given Great Neck's connections to Flora Ziegfeld and Joseph Urban, who live nearby, the drama and spectacle is very fitting with what forms almost a proscenium at the top here, with curtains on each side fabricated out of metal. Also point out one thing that people won't realize necessarily, and something I didn't realize until going and taking photos and seeing this from a block away, is how large this mansard roof is. It's actually almost 2 stories tall, and you don't see it from the street level, but seeing it a block away really shows the just very large design of this building. And while it's still very large, it is proportioned and really doesn't seem that large from the street, which is really quite a remarkable feat to have achieved. In a sense, Walker was really revolutionary. Even the best architects of the time usually excelled in transforming revivalist works from Europe and bringing them stateside. The University Club of New York, and some on this call may even be members, is one of the great examples of taking architecture seen in Italy and adapting it to a modern use. In this case, a 9-story clubhouse is cleverly disguised as really being almost 4 stories. While we could have had buildings like this for a telephone use, Walker envisioned something truly more than just looking to Europe for his designs. To see the impact Walker had, we only need to look at the firm's earlier telephone buildings, which stuck to a strict classical program in the Georgian style. He transformed what we knew as traditional architecture by reimagining something far from revivalist. Walker stands along Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Comfort Tiffany, Buckminster Fuller, Mies van der Rohe, Eero Saarinen, Zaha Hadid, and now Frank Gehry and Santiago Calatrava as one of the architects who forged a path entirely of their own, to design truly in their own way. Looking to the future, these remarkable buildings are given a new life now through the concept of adaptive reuse. Belltel Lofts in Brooklyn, the Stella Tower in Manhattan, and the Walker House Apartments in Newark are a few examples of conversions from office buildings to residential, which ensure a great new future for these buildings. I hope that municipalities will see the value in beautiful, versatile designs that beautify our cities. Should Verizon ever close their Great Neck location, it is luckily protected as a local landmark, which will give it the potential for a new life instead of just chancing demolition. Ralph Walker is unquestionably among the great architects of American history, and Great Neck is so fortunate to have a part of that. If there is some sort of an afterlife, I think we'll be looking down now, smiling from the heavens to see people going out of their way to understand and celebrate his work. I think we'd also greatly appreciate Great Neck Plaza for landmarking his building so it will have some protection for the future. What will the future surely hold for the telephone building? No one can tell for sure. But the more that Great Neck takes note of this great design and leaves room for its reuse, the better off we all will be. Lastly, I want to give a thank you and hat tip to the many people for making this presentation possible, and credit to photographers where credit is due. With that, I will leave room for some Q&A and be happy to answer any questions you might have about this building.
I have a question. I have a question. You're muted.
Go ahead, Carol. Kim, go ahead and answer.
I have a question and a comment. I always thought that that building was on Welwyn Road. I lived at 10 Welwyn Road until I was 9, and we used to play stickball down in the parking lot right next to the building. And as a kid, I never asked, and I never knew what that building was, but I was in constant, I mean, I saw it constantly till I was 9 years old and moved to Thomaston. But I thought that
It's on the corner.
it's on the corner, but it was Welwyn Road, not Shorewood Drive. Shorewood Drive was on the other side of the post office.
Shorewood Drive was the address that it was given when it was first built.
Okay,
And I
okay,
think when the street names changed, that sort of fell
Right.
out of fashion.
Okay.
As you'll note, it doesn't have an actual
an address. That's what I thought, yes. I used to, I mean, for years, I didn't, I just looked at it in awe. And it was really on the street where I was growing up for 7 or 8 years. And it wasn't until I was much older that I found out what the building actually was. I was probably a teenager. I guess I was never curious enough. But the minute I saw this program on it, it just brought back such wonderful memories. And it's a
I'm so
fabulous
proud.
building there. It is great.
Actually, the street address is 9 Barstow Road. and
Okay,
across
but
the street is 8 Barstow Road. So
the front face is Welwyn. Barstow
it
is.
goes
the
all
corner
around.
sign.
It goes all around. So the address that the
Right.
village gives it is
Right.
9 Barstow.
Okay,
And that's the mailing address when we need to send things to Verizon.
okay.
But thank
Thank
you for
you.
your wonderful.
Thank you.
report.
Thank you.
It's
That was
great.
very interesting, yes.
It's very nice to see Jean Selander here because she certainly has led the charge in the plaza to take note and protect these incredible buildings and save the look of Great Neck.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, we're very proud of the historic preservation work we've done. And it's been over a long period of time. It didn't happen in just 1 year.
Right. It's
And
quite a
Nancy
process.
Solomon, if you're on, she helped us a lot in finding and designating and justifying all of the features of these buildings. So thank you, Nancy.
So let's go to Linda Beth, and then we also will go to Gary's question in the chat. We'll go to Linda first. You have to go on mute, Linda. There you go.
This is Linda, I was going to say. Thank you for the presentation, which I enjoyed. A lot of these lines that we're speaking of, the building is designated by the Great Neck Plaza Historical Society, as I know it. But as far as I know, that doesn't protect it as much as our speaker indicated. I think it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it has to be designated historic by New York State.
So the local law of Great Neck Plaza, the Great Neck Plaza Landmarks Commission is a law that is binding and has teeth for enforcement. So any applicant that will go and make changes in the future will have to go before them, and they will have to get permission to make changes. And while that would seem like something that would be a bit truncating a property owner rights, it really does work to protect the community and ensure that community concerns and the community is heard in the process of making decisions. It is protected at the local level, which is really the largest and the most comprehensive protection that it can get. There is the National Register of Historic Places and the New York State Register, but those are purely honorific designations that don't have enforcement when public money is used. If there was private, there's no enforcement when private money is used. If there was public money used, there would be a separate process for environmental impacts, which would look at the impacts to the building. But it is protected largely to the fullest extent currently.
Great.
And we applied for and received state certification, which puts us in that level of having the ability to not have applicants alter the outside of the property without getting review from the Historic Preservation Commission. So it is well protected, as Andrew indicated, and that's because we took the extra step to have a historic landmark commission that is certified by New York State.
I see.
And some questions?
I think there are some questions in the chat.
Yes, so the next question that is going to be asked, this is from Gary. He asked, can you recap the 5 or 6 notable buildings in Great Neck you mentioned?
So I believe he's speaking to the beginning of the presentation of the different architects that I mentioned within just a few hundred feet. The Frank Lloyd Wright building is the Rayburn House in Great Neck Plaza, which I hope to cover in the future. I mentioned Thomas W. Lamb, one of America's preeminent theater architects. He did alterations to the Squire Theater to have become the Squire that many people knew and know now when it was open. I'm trying to think of the other architects that I had mentioned, sorry. Alfred Hopkins designed the Community Church of Great Neck, which is, I believe, just a few blocks over. And I'm blanking on the last name that I had mentioned. But they are roughly around Great Neck Estate,
Emory.
Great Neck Plaza.
Terrific. So there was another question, and I can answer this one. This was from Jerry. Excellent presentation. Is there any chance you could provide a link to these slides? Actually, this presentation will be available online and replay in a couple of days, and we'll post the link on our website, on our Facebook, and other locations, as well as YouTube.
I see we also have a question from Eileen wanting to know what has happened with the Playhouse.
Okay.
Well, aside from being demolished, I do not think that the firm has gotten final, that they're moving forward with all their plans with the village of Great Neck Estates. I think it's sort of stalled from what I know. Is that correct, Bruce?
You're on mute, Bruce.
Unmute. Bruce, unmute.
That's correct. There are a number of issues that the developer has to settle with the village. And it's an ongoing situation where they require them, they have not been on the agenda for the past 2 months since the Playhouse program. And nothing further has been established. I had been in touch with the architectural firm, and there is no movement as far as them starting construction. I will keep everybody posted within our society on that. That was a tragedy in itself, that there was never a landmark commission in the town of Great Neck Estates, which complicated matters even more. We had no representation except the village itself and the support of all of the mayors that were forestalling any type of demolition of that building. And unfortunately, it dwindled and dwindled until they finally settled on a developer. And the only thing we are going to be able to show for that are the original stones of 1922 that will be placed in the basic footprint of the building itself, with a plaque designating that building's site as to where the original Playhouse was built.
I can speak to, unfortunately, the fact that Great Neck Plaza has a landmark ordinance, but the village of Great Neck Estates does not. Even in spite of having such really remarkable architectural pedigree. The other architect I forgot to mention is Emery Roth, who designed 17 Hillside Avenue in Great Neck Estates, which is around the corner from the Frank Lloyd Wright House, which is diagonally across the street from one by Gustav Stickley. There are other homes by Aspinwall and Simpson, a prominent firm of Great Neck, and I believe Frank Forster, who was one of the great estate architects. None of those homes, not a single one of them, has any protection from demolition, including the only Frank Lloyd Wright house outside of upstate New York that he designed on his own. It is bewildering. And if you had an ordinance in the Great Neck Estates Village, there would be community input for the Playhouse, which could have been reused as apartments, as offices, as a community center, any number of future uses that would allow it to be viable and last for the future. But not having a law, they had nothing that they could do. And the developer that owned it had the interior gutted and let it sit for a number of years. And inattention and what is called demolition by neglect is unfortunately a very powerful motivation to get things removed. And I will say that it's very ironic that there's a lot of talk in Great Neck about the storefronts and buildings that are a little bit downtrodden, but none of them are landmarks. Not a single one of them are. So it really doesn't make any sense that people are saying that it's going to perpetuate these issues when there is no designation that's doing it. It's other interests that are playing in favor. But if we want to protect our future, so we don't see the Playhouse lost, we don't see the Brickman Estate in Kings Point, we don't see these remarkable buildings that fill the core of Great Neck's history lost, the only way really to do it is to advocate and to have them protected for the future, which is something that is in the public interest and is something that is really one of the best tools we have to ensure that they will last and they will remain beautiful for the future. And that's something that I think that we all have a role to do. And Great Neck has made strides, but there is still very far to go.
I see you're raising your hand. You need to unmute.
Did unmute. Again. I don't know. I hit unmute.
Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, thank you. I understand that the church on Grace Avenue, the two adjacent buildings may be demolished. There'll be more apartment buildings. That's really a shame. Does anyone know anything about that?
Is that St. Paul's?
Yes.
I know that St. Paul's, the church itself, is a Village of Great Neck Plaza landmark.
Right.
So it is protected. I don't know about the parish house, or I believe the rectory. But again, like other ideas, there are options to have those reused instead of demolished. And the residents would be very advantageous for them to encourage reuse. They could be reused as apartments. They don't need to be demolished. And you can make a beautiful streetscape with what already exists. And there are many places throughout the country that do this every single year. Hundreds and thousands of redevelopment projects. And they could probably even get some tax credits too for doing so in the process.
So there's nothing going on with that. It's just sitting there.
Not that I know of, but I will look into it, certainly.
Wow, thank you.
So Pete, I see in the chat you had questions for Andrew. Were there specific questions you have for Andrew?
Yes, I have three.
Excellent.
Okay, the first one is, you showed the other buildings this architect did. Now, the White Plains one, I'm assuming that's Hamilton Avenue?
I don't actually know the street off the top of my head. I
Yeah, I
do
think it
know
is.
it's in their center core, which was it was part of a large urban renewal project that took many of the buildings that were there and they built sort of modernist buildings. And they refaced it as well as part of it.
Okay, second one, you showed a picture he had done of the RCA building. And having been one of the few people that are still around that have actually been inside the RCA Rocky Point building, looking at the pictures of the outside and having been inside it and seen some of the interior decorations, I just have the feeling that he might have done that building as well.
I know that the RCA building that I showed, that was a design by Crossing Cross, which was one of the very prominent residential and commercial architects. Walker did not have a role in the designing that building, but I believe that they were certainly informed by his ideology and wanted to try and follow in his footstep to meet the programmatic and ornamentation requirements that the clients had. They were a little more inventive than Walker. They really took many of the symbols of telecommunications and made what was literally invisible visible in a way that people could see and enjoy them. So they did a remarkable job. And I think they were really the only architect that was able to match or exceed his level of ingenuity and vision during that period.
All right, the last one, 33 Thomas Street. I just had a comment. That building was designed with a number of ulterior motives, and that's why it looks that way. It's for security.
Yes, there are a number of security features that were inherent in that design of the last AT&T building. I'm not going to get into the kind of conspiracies that people have about it, but I can say that it took advantage of a lot of the zoning requirements in the city. They're a little bit complex, and also just the fact that there were no need for people to be there. So they didn't need windows. They didn't need to really appeal to the streetscape because the whole process was working with machines. And that was a big change from when they first designed buildings for AT&T.
Okay, thank you.
Another question in the chat from VK Wendy. I live at One Hillside Avenue and the architect was Joseph Unger. Do you know anything about him?
I know that he was one of the talented architects. I believe is based out of Flushing, Queens. I know that the building in Hillside Avenue was surveyed by Great Neck Plaza for their landmark survey that they did to try and identify which properties were of historic significance, but I don't believe it was designated. But the results of that survey are online to be viewed. And you can find out a bit more information on the building and its design on the Great Neck Plaza Landmarks website.
Thank you, Andrew. The next question is from Gary. How notable is the post office building, the Chase Bank on Grace, or the Citibank building on the corner?
So those are notable. The post office, which is another building that I hope to cover, was a WPA project. So the Works Progress Administration hired workers to boost economic productivity and to provide jobs during the Great Depression. And many municipalities had WPA projects that were built, schools, post offices, other government works. This was one of them. And the architects who were involved were, I believe, William Dewey Foster and Lewis Simon. That's just the top of my head. I'm not entirely sure that they were the ones who did this, but they were consulting architects to the post office, the treasury, I believe, at the time. And they made a very minimalist, streamlined design, which was very in line with what they were doing in the 30s and 40s. But being moreover a post office during the WPA period, it also had public work art. So the exterior, I believe, has a relief by an artist named Gaetano Cicere, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, which I believe you can see on the outside. And I believe I recall that the interior also had a mural. Because of that, it is very significant in our nation's history. And I believe it is both a National Register listed building, as well as one that is a Great Neck landmark, a Great Neck Plaza landmark. The Chase Bank was by an architect named the Architects Collaborative, which was a firm founded by Walter Gropius with Benjamin Thompson. And they hoped to create the first suburban branch of a major Manhattan bank. And they made an interesting design, which I'm going to cover in a later lecture in more detail. It is a Great Neck Plaza landmark. And the Citibank is a very traditional classical bank building for, I believe, the Great Neck Trust Company was the original bank it was built for. It is very nicely ornamented, it is well preserved. I don't know who the architect is, so I can't speak to, unfortunately, who that is. But it is a very nice example. The interior is unfortunately gutted, which is very disappointing to me as someone who loves interiors. But if we find information on the architect, I will certainly cover them if they are of note.
Thank you.
Sure.
Kim, you have your, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, in regards to the post office, which I used to play at when I was 4 years old, up and down the steps. I live in Maryland, and when I was working for someone, I came across in Rockville, Maryland, the same architecture design of the post office in Rockville, Maryland. It is now a police station, but it was a post office up until maybe 10 years ago. And it's this, I thought I was, walking into my past, same exact interior and outside. It was very interesting. So it was probably done during the same time and obviously by the same designed by the same architects. So
Most likely, they used a lot of very similar plans, sort of formulaic plans to save on costs and to save on different overhead. It may have also been the same architects. They did a lot of, these two happen to be sort of staff architects for the Treasury Department, but they may have used a variation of that design as well down there. I'll also point out that when architects were contracted for the post offices, there were staff firms, but there were also, really the preeminent architects throughout the country got involved as well. You go to Flushing, Queens, you'll see Dwight James Baum. In Garden City is Walker and Gillette. Cross and Cross designed as well. Glen Cove is a Delano and Aldrich post office. It's really quite remarkable to see these super famous, super talented architects in such a context where it's just as simple as going to your post office and you're seeing a work of one of the masterful architects in our country's design history. It's really a remarkable and just an extraordinary privilege to see that and to see it preserved as well. And many of the artworks that came with the post offices have been maintained too. So it's really a great thing. I know as someone from Manhasset High School was a WPA project, and people don't realize how just absolutely beautiful the school is and how just remarkable it is to go to a place that's a piece of history instead of just this regular, ordinary modernist building. And I will say the interior has been preserved. It's one of the most beautiful interiors of a school that I've seen anywhere. Great Neck is also very nice, but theirs was earlier.
The next question is from Lisa. She says, 17 Hillside just went to contract, so this house can be knocked down? It's a question.
If you're speaking to the house in Hillside Avenue that was by Emery Roth, indeed it could be. There is nothing stopping demolition of that house, even despite being an Emery Roth design, and one of his very few residential designs for a single family house. That is the consequence of not having a landmarks law. And I can only hope that the residents will get engaged and really strongly advocate that a path for a future can be found for it. It is not a lost cause. The interior can be adapted as the owner see fits, but it is a beautiful, beautiful building on the outside with very detailed terracotta ornamentation. And it would be a really significant loss, one of many further to come for Great Neck's past if it were to be lost.
A couple of comments here. I'm just going in order in the chat. Kensington from Kim, Kensington Elementary School was a tragic loss. From Corey, thank you for your interesting presentation. Local historic preservation with teeth is key. Here in Smithtown, I've documented the 1927 phone building as Walker's, and it too is an area with numerous architects. I have proposed it to be included to be placed in a national register. From Raya, is there a way to contract Andrew? We have further questions in email.
Absolutely, happy to answer any further questions.
Again, more comments, Andrew. Thank you. Nice to finally see you. That's from Bonnie. Oh, Joan, you're up to talk about the plaque program.
Yes, a couple of years ago, I started a program for the Great Neck Historical Society, and we call it the plaque program. It doesn't protect any of these structures in Great Neck, but it does recognize them. And we now have about 21 homes and buildings that were recognized by the Historical Society. And you can read about each one of them by going to the homepage of the Great Neck Historical Society. And there's a link called Recognition, and it has about a one-page description for each of these houses and buildings, including the village school, the high school, and then other interesting homes. Some of them notable not so much for the architect, but for the people who lived in them, like Groucho Marx. So right now the committee has been inactive because I moved to Maryland and I'm near Rockville, so I'll have to check out that post office. If anyone is interested in carrying on this project, it's wonderful because there are no deadlines and you can kind of, I got to see the interiors of some wonderful places, and it would be interesting to the rest of the community. So get in touch with us if you're interested.
Thank you, Joan. This is a continuation from Corey, from his previous comment. To continue my message earlier that could not be seen while typing, I proposed the Walker Building be placed in a National Register Historic District, but the town is not interested. It is now surrounded with condo development in progress just off Main. Kim? Yeah, we talked about the post office. Yes, I know I'm catching up, guys. I'm sorry. So from Bonnie, is the Witchwood and Fort Maple, for example, protected or landmarked?
I believe the Winchwood has a designation from the Historical Society, which is non-binding, but I don't believe that one or the other one are official landmarks, to my knowledge.
Okay. And Jay, I have a direct message. This is a question perhaps you can give a quick update on. There was a question from Helen about an update on the grist mill.
So we are working on two big projects. One is the lighthouse, which really the town of North Hempstead controls. We're working with them. And the grist mill is, quote, owned by Nassau County. And Nassau County is coming up with a plan to restore. The plan was sooner or later to actually be operative again and be used as a tourist center to appreciate what that's on the National Historical Registry. So with politics, where I think was mentioned before, please get involved. You can join our organization. The more members we have, the more clout we have. And I think I saw something, how did we find out? It's greatneckhistorical.org. And that's where you can find some of the plaque program Joan mentioned. And also we'd appreciate you joining. So when we give a call to Nassau or town of North Hempstead, they understand there's a real community involvement.
I think I kind of sound like a broken record, and many of the things that I speak to, whether it's here in Great Neck or Manhasset or in New York City, I think to speak to most of the people on this call, you can remember the remarkable time you had, whether as a child or as a young adult or as an adult, growing up and living in Great Neck. And I think that was really partially due to the great history it had and due to the beautiful buildings that are there and the stories and the memories that were generated. And what I see from that is a need to protect it so people who are my age, I'm 25 years old, will be able to see it in the future and will be able to know what was there. And that won't come without intense advocacy and serious organizing to say that our history matters and deserves to be protected. So my generation and those after me will get to have the same great, enriching experiences that you all did here.
Well, I think we can see what happens when a community is propelled by the loss of such a building and the proposal for something that is totally out of character and size for the neighborhood in the recent fight in Thomaston. And that took a tremendous amount of organizing. The people who banded together spent innumerable hours working very hard to network and advocate. And it is to the credit of so many people like Andrew, who gave valuable information. They had hired consultants as well who totally agreed and confirmed everything he said, and other local historians. And we really do need people who are interested in advocating and networking and using their connections to help influence and to band together. That it really does take work. And this kind of program sparks an interest, and that's why I'm so appreciative. But anyway, back to you, Rachel, if there are some more questions.
I see two more questions. And then I know we're going to have a lot of follow-up because everybody is fired up. It's great. We're so excited that you guys are as excited as we are. So one of the questions here, another one from Gary, is there anything notable up at the Merchant Marine Academy?
Oh yes, that's a great question. the Academy is a presentation itself, from its
Lovely.
first history as a estate for Henri Bindel, then Walter Chrysler, then it was purchased, eminent domain acquired by the government for the Merchant Marine Academy. So it is really a remarkable in terms of its history for being an estate, and then for the Academy, which brought in very remarkable architects to add academic buildings for the site. And then next door to the Academy is the Merchant Marine Museum, which was another estate. So it is really many layers of history. And on top of that, if that all wasn't enough, it has two of the eagles from the original Penn Station, which are in front of their athletic hall. I don't know the name off the top of my head. And I was just there earlier this week. The grounds have reopened to public visitation for those who are vaccinated and can show proof of vaccination. So you too can go and see the eagles as well. It's a lovely walk, and they're really in very nice shape. And those are from Penn Station. So it's really kind of neat to see those here in Great Neck. But I hope to cover in the future the history of the Academy and the museum to showcase those secrets for everyone.
We're looking forward to that.
So outside of asking for your phone number, your email, your blog, your socials, how to get in touch with you, the last question that we have, Andrew, for now is, this one's from Faith, and she asks, is the Kenwood Apartments on Middle Neck protected?
It is I believe it was recognized by the Great Neck Historical Society, but it is not a local landmark. So it does not have that legal protection from demolition or changes.
Yeah, it's in Great Neck Estates. They don't have a law.
It's unlikely that anything would happen to this residence, since there are almost 70 residents in the building. I can't see anything transpiring as far as it being in jeopardy. It hasn't since 1925, and I don't think anything is in the forecast future.
Buildings are, at least residential buildings, are a little bit more secure in the sense that there are many occupants. But knowing for the future that there are places that have a designation is a very surefire way to make sure that things are protected. And it's really one of the great ways to do it. If you look at New York City, you see these beautiful areas like Greenwich Village, the Upper East Side, even areas in Brooklyn that are protected, and they look almost like you go back in time and you wouldn't know that you're in 2022. That's because they're landmarked, and the changes that are made are done very carefully to be sympathetic. So you know that what's being done is going to look good and is going to be something that you wouldn't see as being out of character with the past. Long Island has not really embraced that so much. Great Neck has embraced it to a certain extent, but it really varies from village to village. And you'll find some that have laws that are implemented well, and others that have no law at all, and they're willing to demolish anything that there's a need, or a need is seen to be demolished, which is where you lose things like the Playhouse and the other places that have been lost in recent years.
Bonnie slipped in one more question. So she had a comment. First, she said, I heard the Kenwood is the oldest first co-op in New York State. And then she asked, what is the difference between landmarked and protected?
So I guess there's differences in landmarking. I could have a whole presentation on that. In fact, I did when I was advocating in Thomaston. There are different forms of landmarking, basically ones that are at the local level for village or town governments, which have enforcement and teeth for protection. And there's also the National Register, which is a nationwide and something the state gets involved with, that is more honorific protection. So it doesn't really protect in a sense of if there was a threat, but it does, I guess, give value to properties, which people do take note of. And there is some mitigation for the environmental review. But really the only way to do it is at the local level. To villages that don't have a local landmarks law to have them enact one. And I will also point out, there's a question on Kings Point. Kings Point has a landmarks law, but to my knowledge, they've only designated one property, the Cohan Estate. None of the other properties have been declared as landmarks, in spite of having probably over 30 remarkable estates from preeminent architects there. I did submit a survey that I personally did to Kings Point, and they unfortunately have not responded to that. They do have a landmarks board, I believe, but there's a lot to go there.
And I think that came about with the Cohan House because there was a real groundswell of support for preserving that house and not seeing it totally demolished. And I think it looks very different from how it used to look, but it evidently retains some aspects. But there was quite a hue and cry, and there was a lot of community pressure to save that house.
All that was saved. Unfortunately, what was the Brickman estate at the Point, which is a state called the Point for John King, that was left vacant for a number of years after, I believe there was a dispute with the family estate. There was a bit of, I believe, death in the process, and it was left essentially abandoned. And people went and photographed it, went and really vandalized the property. It was unsecured, and it really became to the point where it was almost unsavable. And I know the Historical Society tried to do something to intervene, but lacking a landmarks law, it really was, there was very little that could be done. So you lose one of Kings Point's oldest houses. There were remarkable gardens. There were outbuildings by Lord and Burnham, the famous greenhouse manufacturer. All that is now lost. And what could have been the centerpiece of a redevelopment or repurposed in some way is all lost to history. And that was really one of, two big losses in a single year, span of years, the Great Neck, which is really quite devastating.
Raya asked a question. It's the last one in the chat. But I also think it speaks to a couple of things that, Andrew, in the future you're going to present on, which has to do with landmarking and process and the different variations. But which subsets of Great Neck have landmark laws? Does Lake Success?
I don't believe that Lake Success has landmark ordinance. The parts that are not villages, so just in North Hempstead has a landmarks ordinance and a landmarks board. Kings Point has an ordinance, but only one landmark designated to my knowledge. Great Neck Plaza, as we discussed, has a very strong ordinance, and they have many that are declared. Thomaston has their first landmark ever declared. That was a couple weeks ago. Very excited about that. So they're on the way to having more landmarks because I'm personally involved with that. I'm trying to think of, I don't know of any off the top of my head what other villages have ordinances. Many do not, which is really quite unfortunate.
I know that I don't think the village of Great Neck has an ordinance. However, the Allen Farmhouse has been designated by some. Do you know about that, Joan? The Allen Farmhouse that's on Beach.
Yeah, I can't give you any information. on that.
It has some sort of designation. It was an Allen, which was a famous family that owned a lot of land and farms in Great Neck, and their
Allen Wood
home
Farm.
place
Wasn't that in Allenwood Park in Kensington, the Allen family? Is that the same family?
That's, well, I'm saying that the location of this particular house
oh.
is on Beach Road.
It was the Baker Farm.
And the Baker Farm is also in the village of Great Neck. As is the Wedding Cake Building, which is another one that we would hate to lose.
Mm-hmm. What is the landmark that has been designated in Thomaston, please?
Belgrave Motors, Tower Ford.
That's considered Thomaston, not Great Neck
That is-
Plaza?
That is Thomaston. Thomaston's a
Thomaston.
very oddly shaped village, kind of
Yes,
carved
because
out.
I grew up, yeah, I lived off of Grace Avenue and I never knew that Belgrave, I just read that it was saved, but I didn't realize it was Thomaston.
They had an ordinance never declared, and a group of residents got involved and made the first declaration in 2021 of all
Yeah.
time. So it's really quite remarkable. But that came from the community, which really was united. If it wasn't for the community, I don't think it would have ever happened.
Mm-mm.
But it really comes from ordinary people, just like you and I, saying this matters and
I don't live there.
personally taking charge. It was a lot of meetings, it was a lot of work, but really just incredible to go back, you know, if we were to go back 25 years from now and say, we did this, we made this possible, and others will get to know what was here. That really is something that's extraordinarily gratifying and hopeful for our future.
Well, I think that is the perfect note. I would like to recognize Rachel. Thank you so much for making our Zoom possible and making it easy and fun and taking care of making sure all the questions got asked. And thank all of you for coming. And Andrew, it has just been wonderful. We just feel like you are you have been a gift to come into our lives with the Historical Society. And I'm always excited to see people's faces, and we hope one of these days that we'll be able to get together in person, and we'll have to make up for lost time and have some really, really super refreshments. But it is very good to see you. I will say this, Karen Rubin asked a question. She said, where am I? I wanted to say I'm on a cruise and this is my balcony, but that would mean that this wave has never moved. This picture was taken when we went to Puerto Rico many years ago, and it was a fun backdrop for tonight. But thank all of you for coming, and we hope to see you again soon. And please, we would love you to get involved. And if there's any talent, any interest that you have, just let us know. Be in touch with us. Thank you. And Jay, do you want to say anything? Our president?
Just greatneckhistorical.org. We're happy to have new members. As was discussed, the more members we have, the more clout we have with some of the public servants that we need to deal with.
Also, thank you, Carol, for being a fabulous hostess, as always. You always shine.
Well, my pleasure. This was like a plum that just dropped into our laps.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
I also mentioned there's one more question, I believe. I'm happy to answer, and my email is in the chat if anyone has further questions. Happy to answer any emails.
Grace, go ahead. We see your hand raised now. You have to unmute. Grace. Maybe she hit it by accident.
Okay.
Oh, All right. I think that's it. So Andrew put his contact information in the chat. Everybody who RSVP'd will still get to spam Andrew anytime they wish. This program will be posted online on our website, in Facebook and YouTube. So if your friends or family, if they weren't able to attend tonight, or you want to go back and visit, it will be online forever. So thank you so much. Oh, and also public access. We also will be airing this on public access television here on the island. So enjoy, and thank you so much, everybody, for attending. It was a great program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks
good
again,
evening.
Rach. Love it.
Night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.